Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final panel where we, in partnership with Northwell Health, are recognizing leaders across the sports industry. In this discussion, we have the pleasure of speaking with three of the absolute best athletes in the world. We are joined by Sam Mewis of the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team and Manchester City. She was named the 2020 U.S. Female Player of the Year, and in 2019, she helped the U.S. bring home the FIFA World Cup. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have with us Kathleen Baker of the U.S. National Swim Team. Kathleen competed in the 2016 Rio Olympics, where she won a gold and silver medal for the U.S. She also has 8 World Championship medals, 3 gold, 3 silver, and 2 bronze. Kathleen, great to have you.
Thanks, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're also excited to have Sarah Nurse of the Canadian Women's Ice Hockey Team and the PWHPA. She competed in the 2018 Winter Olympics, where she won a silver medal, notching a gold for Team Canada. Thanks for taking the time, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and you know, guys, so Sam, you're in England, Sarah, you're in Canada, Kathleen, you're in Spain. We've all gotten very familiar with these video calls. So happy that we could do it, because without these, we probably wouldn't be able to coordinate all of you together. But it's for kind of, the most unfortunate reasons that we've gotten so familiar with these video calls. It's because of COVID-19. Really, no one has gone unaffected by this pandemic. That includes professional athletes like yourselves. Sam, let's start with you. What has life as a professional soccer player looked like in England during the pandemic?
Yeah, well, it's been very focused, actually. I think that because we haven't been able to do much outside of training and games with my teammates, I feel like all of my energy and all of my focus has just gone right into playing soccer, which has, I think, helped my performance. It's helped our team chemistry. So I think in that sense, just being totally focused on this one thing has actually been good. I'm definitely excited to maybe experience some things outside of soccer. The whole time I've been here has been pretty strict. But I think overall that in some ways we've been able to really just focus on what we need to do on the field, and that's been a good thing.
Well, and Kathleen, I wonder if it's been similar for you, especially during that pause when we just didn't know enough about COVID, so people weren't allowed to be around each other. And, I saw swimmers on like Instagram swimming in these tiny pools. What was training like for you during that period?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely crazy. One, I just really enjoyed training. It's my whole life. So I was like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do when everything paused? But luckily I have a really awesome coach who's super creative. I live in San Diego usually, and I was swimming at like the Navy SEAL base, on the Marine Corps base in San Diego, swimming in a backyard pool. So I was getting really creative to try to get training in. It wasn't the same intensity and things like that, but at least it was an outlet and sort of kept me in shape, because in swimming you can get out of shape in like a week. It's like detrimental. And I was like, I do not want to take like 6, 8, 12 weeks off and try to get back in the sport. It's so miserable, as everyone knows, to try to get it back in shape when you're out of shape. So I got to do that, and also just like enjoying having a little bit more flexibility, especially last spring, to spend time with like my friends and my boyfriend and like go surfing that I usually wouldn't do when I'm training 6, 7 hours a day.
Yeah, Sarah, did you have that period too where, you've been training, I feel like your whole life, right, for on ice, and then all of a sudden you're not necessarily allowed to? Did you have that period where you started to explore different parts of your life?
Absolutely. I think when COVID first came about last year, it was at an interesting time for us as hockey, because that's kind of transitioning to our off season anyways. So although the rest of our seasons were canceled and our world championships and everything, we were already transitioning to our off season. So the impact of it didn't really actually hit all of us until August, September, because that's when hockey season starts back up, and that's when we weren't allowed on the ice. And so this year, with restrictions being so different everywhere in the world, we've actually had to skate with maximum of 10 people in the entire arena. So we have like no team skates, no games, anything like that. And so it's been completely different for us, because we haven't really had that team aspect. So finding creative ways to stay connected with our team through Zoom calls and through different things. Like we had a Team Canada baking challenge with like our players, staff, everybody with the national program. And I finished 5th. I'm not a baker, so like that's my claim to fame. And so I just think through this whole year, it's been about creativity and finding ways to keep yourself engaged.
What did you bake?
We had it was like a 4-week thing. Like it was serious. Yeah, I did cake pops, like little snowman. I made cookies. We had to do like a gingerbread house. So somebody actually made Canada House. It was crazy. And then I did for my showstopper, this big cake covered in fondant. It looked like a gift. I'll have to send pictures.
I love how Olympians can't even do baking at a normal level. You guys are minimum 4 weeks, bake off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Competitive.
So during this time, we've seen that fans are absolutely itching for sports. When all sports stopped, fans and consumers were just really reaching out for that. Sam, during that period, I don't know if you saw it on social media or whatnot, when you see your fans just really wanting you to perform, did that either reinforce or maybe reframe what your career means to people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know that I've thought about it that way, but I feel like not having those opportunities to interact with fans after games was really different. I think that as somebody who looked up to the U.S. women's national team as a kid, I remember how important it was to me to have a player come over after a game and maybe get an autograph or just wave at you. You felt so special. So to not have that interaction, there is this obvious distance created between you and the fans. And social media is obviously such a great tool to re-engage with them and maybe do something that helps keep that kind of relationship alive. I think once sports did start back up, and for me, we were playing in empty stadiums and are still playing in empty stadiums, you definitely miss the energy that they bring. You miss the cheers when something goes well, and you miss the anxiety and all the things that the fans bring energy-wise to the stadium. So I definitely think this time has reinforced just how important they are and how much they care and how much that really, truly helps us with our performance and just appreciating what we do and how it affects other people.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have such special careers where it does affect other people. And we see that a lot with the Olympics. I think in particular, it brings a lot of people together, not just behind a sport, but behind their country. So Kathleen, as an Olympic athlete, when you heard the news that the dates of your Olympics were going to shift, what was that like for you? Let's just talk about the mental aspect first. What kind of went through your head? How did you know that was coming? How did you react?
I think at the moment that's what I wanted to happen, because I was originally having such a hard time finding space to train, and California shut down pretty early on compared to a lot of states. So I felt like some of my peers were still in normal training, and I'm over here can't even go to a restaurant or even find anywhere to swim. So I had a lot of anxiety around oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm missing training while my competition's training, things like that. And then it was sort of an immediate relief when it got postponed. And then it set in that I've trained this last quad cycle 4 years exactly for this moment. My training's been planned out. And then all of a sudden, I don't have that anymore. I'm probably going to have to do that entire year again. And the Olympic year is definitely the hardest on you physically and mentally. And then I sort of felt like I lost a little bit of who I was, because I'm so used to this very regimented schedule, and I no longer have that. So I was a little stuck, not sure what to do, because all of my identity I felt comes so much from the sport of swimming, and there's no competitions. I'm not a normal schedule. And I definitely had a meltdown, and I'm a team, it's okay to have a meltdown. You don't need to wallow in the moment for weeks and weeks, but it's okay to have that moment either by yourself or with someone you really care about who can support you and lift you up. But after I had my meltdown in my car by myself, crying because I was oh my God, the Olympics, what? I feel like I was able to sort of just turn that around and find different ways to improve that weren't just going to practice every single day, and also just enjoying the process and enjoying little moments that don't have to do with swimming.
Well, and Sam, you're a summer athlete too. So, Kathleen just spoke a little bit to the mental side. What goes into it? I know you can't explain to me in 45 minutes the physical side of training for an Olympics, but what happens when it shifts by a year physically when you're training?
Yeah, well, I think a huge piece of that was just that, like Kathleen said, we weren't having regular trainings or games in that time. So I think all of us had this anxiety of, are we going to be prepared enough for this summer? And when the Olympics did get postponed, my immediate reaction was, okay, I have more time to prepare. The team is going to have more time to kind of gel together as a team. And I think that it was just that wanting to have your schedule back and wanting to have your training back, be played into games, be fit to play 90 minutes, and finding those opportunities, which was one of the big reasons why I decided to come to Manchester City, was to have these regular games. I think that was really important for everybody. But like Kathleen said, it is physically and mentally really exhausting to prepare for a world tournament. And to know that was, like, in our cycle, we have 4 years with the World Cup and the Olympics, and then there's 2 down years where there's no major tournament. And so just to know that stress and that physical demand was extended by a year, it was definitely a lot, but I think something that obviously was best for the Olympics and hopefully will give everybody ample time to prepare.
So what I'm hearing is there was a sense of sorrow and somewhat loss, but also a sense of relief to give the athletes the best kind of environment to prepare to perform at their best.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I mean, I have never been to the Olympics, so part of me was devastated because just that opportunity, when you're so close, it gets moved. Who knows where you'll stand a year later? So I was definitely feeling the sorrow, but of course had that understanding that it was the best decision.
Okay, so Sarah, from what we've heard of Kathleen and Sam, and you're a winter athlete, but obviously you can speak to the part where Kathleen was saying, this is part of my identity. So when something like that shifts, it's not just unfortunate, it's, well, you really start to question a lot because this is what your life is. That kind of transitions us into our next topic, which is being a professional athlete. What don't we see? We see all of you at the ticker tape parades and on the podiums with your medals, which is fantastic. But what don't we see that leads you to these points? And I'm sure there's a huge list, but it's Sarah, if you could start.
Well, I mean, as female athletes especially, you really only see us at the Olympics, World Championships, or World Cup in Sam's case. You don't see us day in and day out like you may see the men, right? Like, there are always cameras, there are always stories being run on them. And so a lot of our time is actually spent away from the limelight where you don't see. And you may see us achieve great things, or you actually may see us fail and maybe lose whatever match we're in or whatever we're doing. And so a lot goes on behind the scenes. And I think just to both of their points before about the Olympics being moved, as Olympic athletes, we kind of work our lives in 4-year quads. And so my heart went out to all of the Tokyo athletes, because it's like, you plan your life around the Olympics. That's a major event. And so to have that shifted, that's like shifting your life an extra year in advance. And so I think as we think about what goes on behind the scenes, there's definitely a lot. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, as cliche as that is, that goes into having to prepare for special moments. And I think when we have the opportunity to perform in front of people and they see us, that's our one opportunity. And that's an extra added layer of pressure that people may not see.
Yeah, Kathleen, to Sarah's point, she was just explaining how, when we do see female athletes perform a lot, I think more in certain sports, we kind of only see them perform during these big events, like Sarah's saying, the Olympics, whatnot. Does that add a pressure when you perform? Do you feel a type of responsibility as a female athlete when you do have that chance in the spotlight to show what you can do?
Yeah, I mean, swimming is extremely popular at the Olympics and then not super popular any other year. So it's definitely something that I think about. And at the same time, I really just want to be an inspiration to young girls and young athletes, and also represent my country super well. And that's always something I want to think about. I had great role models growing up in the sport of swimming, where I had so many females to look up to, and I want to continue that legacy and inspire the younger people on the national team to become that as they get older too. And I think that at an Olympic level, that's such an amazing platform where you can share so many stories and just like represent yourself, which I think is something that's really special about the Olympics, is that we also get to hear so many of the backstories that are so important, that help us like get to know different athletes, and these stories that it isn't just the Olympic, that moment, that for me, minute or 2 minute race that gets seen on the TV. It's like all that's come before that and all that'll come after that.
Okay, so with all of this said, I want to try and exercise with you guys. And Sam, I'm starting with you, putting you on the spot. Here we go. So you need to complete the sentence, all right? I've given soccer blank, and soccer has given me blank. If you could fill in those blanks for me. Told you I was putting you on the spot.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like the statement, like you could see it as a trade-off. I think on one hand, I've given soccer so much of like my family time. I'm constantly away from home, constantly away from people who mean a lot to me. And I've missed birthdays and weddings and like really important things. I've missed holidays. I know my mom, like I missed Thanksgiving so many years in a row. And my mom always was just like, oh, can't you please come home? So I think on that hand, it is so hard to constantly choose something over your family, over your heart. But soccer has given me like a whole nother kind of family. The teammates that I've had are people that are going to be in my life forever. The stories that I can tell, the championships I've won, I think that it was alluded to already, but it's so much a part of who you are. I was actually just recently asked, like, who is Sam Mewis off the field? And I really had to like put some thought into it and think about what that meant, because so many of my characteristics are from soccer. So it's such a big piece of my identity, and it has given me a lot of trying moments and a lot of anguish and stress, but it has given me like the purest joy as well. So in that sense, I feel like I owe the sport so much.
Okay, and I want to hang on to what Sam said about identity, because we are going to revisit that. Sarah, I wonder if you echo similarly when you complete the sentence of I've given hockey and hockey has given me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we've all had to make, I have a tough time calling them sacrifices when it comes to sport, because ultimately it's what I want to do, and it's where I want to be. And so I guess when I think of your statement, I kind of think of, I started playing hockey when I was 5 years old. So I was this like raw, new, untainted thing. And then going into hockey, I feel like it's empowered me to find out so much about myself. And it's really given me so many of like attributes and traits like leadership, the ability to communicate, networking. Like I just feel like hockey has given me so much, and it's really helped empower me to be the person that I am today.
And well, so again, from what you're describing though, is like you start from such a young age, and it is part of who you are. It helps create who you are. And Sam, this is exactly what you were explaining. It's part of your identity. And that's why I think when people talk about professional athletes like yourselves, especially as of late, mental health plays a huge part in that. I think it's a conversation that maybe has come to the forefront, maybe even a little more in the last few years than it had previously. So Kathleen, in what ways though, for swimming specifically, does mental health intersect with your profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is, and like across the board, I don't know how much of a difference it is in sports, but I always look at like we pick our Olympic team at Olympic trials, and it's one of the worst moments probably of my life, and I've made the team. And they always say it's not always like the most talented who make it, it's like the most mentally strong or tough. And that goes all the way back into mental health and making sure that you are not just so wrapped up in swimming or your sport that that's the only thing that is bringing you joy or happiness. And I think that that is something that as a sport we could do better on, is finding like outlets, and definitely something I could also do better on, finding outlets that bring you joy and self-worth outside of the sport and performance. And I think that also within that, there's transitions in life and in professional sports, moving from collegiate to professional. Swimming, there's this like lonely factor that you used to be surrounded by this whole team, and now you're pretty much by yourself doing your own thing. You have a lot of I guess pressure on yourself, and making sure that you're still finding that circle and not getting yourself in too wrapped up in like a lonely hole, I guess. And so just keeping that like people around you who can raise you up, whether that be your coaches, teammates, friends outside of your sport, which it's so important to have those too when you have time, of course. And I think just keeping as much of a positive attitude and looking at it that this is still a sport. I did this because it's supposed to be fun. I started when I was 8 years old, and now I'm still doing it and still having fun, and not getting so caught up in making money, best times, world records, medals, and still just enjoying that moment sort of helps my mental health stay on the positive side of things.
Well, I'm always so interested when athletes decide to make that jump, those who can, from collegiate to professional, and kind of what goes behind that decision. Sam, can you explain what that jump looked like for you and how you went about making that?
Yeah. Well, I, from a very young age, wanted to play professionally, but the leagues in the U.S. had been off and on during my like adolescent years, and so I was never fully sure that there was going to be a professional league when I was done with college. But the national team was always strong ever since I watched the 1999 Women's World Cup. I wanted to be on that team. So I kind of always had my sights set on that, like literally from when I was 7 years old and all the way through college. And luckily, I was getting called into camps with that team, and I knew that it was a realistic possibility. And also, luckily, fortunately, there was a league, the NWSL, as I was leaving college. So I entered the draft and got drafted to Western New York, where I played for 2 seasons. And I think for women's soccer in the US, that has been like a very steady growth ever since. And I'm really excited for the sport. I hope that this opportunity continues to be available and that we can continue to make it an even more promising career for women.
So along that path, when did you start to consider mental health as it pertains to your career? Do you remember kind of the first time when you really did consider maybe your own or a player, like a teammate's mental health?
Yeah, I think that I was always so self-critical, and I had a few close friends growing up who were even more self-critical than me, and maybe to a place where it didn't help them. I think that during like your adolescent years, when you don't really know what's going on, you have all these hormones happening. It's such a crazy time to expect yourself to be competing at a high level under stress. But I was playing in some youth World Cups. I was deciding where I wanted to go to college. And I think that I learned to handle stress by being very organized. And my approach to anxiety and stress around my sport is to like make lists of things. And I think that.
So that's all I needed to do to make the Olympics was make a list?
No, I mean, obviously it's a very prevalent issue. I think this is what's worked for my minor case of anxiety, but I do think that in soccer and in sport in general, it's something that we haven't talked about for very long, and I'm glad that it's coming up more recently, because it's definitely something that not only can help performance, but it of course will help people's lives if we can get people's mental health in a really good place.
Well, Sarah, how would you assess the ways in which people, athletes, coaches, fans are talking about mental health as it pertains to athletes?
I think in terms of athletes, we've seen obviously like the prevalence of mental health and I guess the stigma ending about reaching out and getting help if you need to. And I think we've seen in the last, few years how highly mental health and mental performance is regarded, because I've been working personally with a mental performance consultant since I was 18 years old. And so I think the impact of your mental health is just as important as that training load. My strength coach and my mental performance consultant are on the same plane. And I think that that's something that's so key. I look at with my own experiences making the Olympic team myself. I don't think it was necessarily because I was, that much better than the people that I was competing against. But I think because I was able to leverage my mental performance consultant and really get my mind right, I think I had an advantage over who I was competing with. And so from a high performance standpoint, I think that it's so important, and it's going to help, future generations of athletes be incredibly successful.
Well, and Kathleen, for people who aren't Olympic athletes, who maybe don't have access to these coaches like Sarah's describing, outside of those professional coaches, where do you find your support systems?
For sure, my family and my boyfriend. My poor parents, I call them like literally every day and tell them what I do in practice. And they're so supportive and have been there every step of the way. And I'm so fortunate to have an amazing family who knows enough about swimming after this long, and a sister who swam. So they sort of get what I'm going through and are always there to pick up the phone. I also really have a great relationship with my coach. And I think that's really important, is being able to be honest with them, and then also just having really good teammates. A lot of my teammates are not training with me. We're scattered around the country. And I think that just knowing that we all have each other, especially during COVID, we were having like weekly Zoom calls where we would dress up or do something fun with my national team teammates. So just having a good surrounding support system that you can really rely on. And for me, my family and my boyfriend are so great that I can come to them without feeling like judgment. And I can really let them know if I'm struggling or if I'm having a hard time overcoming adversity or anything like that. And I think being able to find that outlet where you can vent without judgment is so important, especially when you're feeling a lot of pressure on you, whether that be through just your own self or just training for the Olympics.
Well, I love how you said your poor parents get calls. I'm sure from their Olympic athlete daughter, they are fine getting those calls. Those P&G commercials get me all the time. I'm sure they're very happy to get your calls, Kathleen. But as we're nearing the end of our discussion, I do want to transition to our final topic. Sam, I'm going to start with you on this question. Do you think as a society, people in general consider you three female athletes or athletes who happen to be female? And is there a difference?
I think there is a difference. Yeah, I think that, of course, I would want to be seen as an athlete who's then is also a woman, and I feel like in global, like my experience in the U.S., my experience here in the U.K. Has been a little bit different. I feel like it's possible for things in general to be getting better, but still not be good and still not be where we want to be. I also feel like America is really diverse in opinion on this, and that there are certainly some people who love women's sports and love watching and are big fans and want to invest in it. But at the same time, for every one of those people, there is some other people who totally disagree, don't think that it's worth investing in, don't think that the product is as good. And I am inspired by changes that we've seen, but I know that there is still a lot of work to do in this area. And that work, I think, includes changing that perception that we are just female athletes and that we are athletes. We just happen to be women.
Right. Sarah, I wonder, have you run across that being referred to as a female athlete rather than, just a hockey player, an Olympic hockey player? Definitely.
I think that, like Sam, I want to be referred to as an athlete who happens to be female, because I think it is important to make that distinction. But I think that we've had a lot of people doubt us and say that we only have gotten to have certain opportunities because we're female and we're seen as a little bit inferior to the men and to our male counterparts. And I think that's very unfortunate. I definitely think that the tides are changing, and, change can never happen fast enough. But I was actually watching an interview the other day with Doris Burke, and she says, change takes everyone. And it's so true, because it doesn't just take the women. It doesn't just take BIPOC individuals. Like, it takes everybody for a change to happen. And so, again, like with the next generation of athletes, I really want them all to be seen and have equal opportunity, because I think that's the biggest piece. That's what we're lacking, is equal opportunity.
Well, Kathleen, working off of Sarah's comment, as a professional athlete who is a woman, do you feel a large responsibility to help kind of reach this point of equity?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's not even just in like how many people support women's sports. I also see it in like how women are supposed to act in sports. I always use the World Cup as like a really great example of what I love is that like you guys celebrated so genuinely, and I feel like so like few times in like my sport do women actually like go crazy and celebrate their success. It's definitely more on like subtle levels that compared to the men, and I think that was just really awesome for people to see. And then at the same time, like I love being able to be feminine in my sport. I love wearing earrings, getting my nails done, having makeup on when I compete, all of the above. But I don't think that that needs to be something that takes away from me being able to win an Olympic gold medal or break a world record or anything like that. And just sort of looking at more and more athletes and female athletes sort of just rising to the occasion and being these stories for younger kids to look up to, and hopefully that just keeps setting the tone. I mean, I definitely feel like we've seen improvements in my time as a professional athlete or even just in college, but I feel like we have such a long way to go where it isn't so different from male to female in mentalities that are acceptable, and also how much I guess attention that male versus female athletes in sports get.
You raised such an interesting point about Sam and her team celebrating so genuinely. Sam, you are absolutely one of the experts to talk about bearing this responsibility of equity and reaching true equity. You personally, what has that been like, I guess, after following the World Cup? You guys had so much attention and it's continuing on. Is there a sense of responsibility when you go out on that field? Is it something you think about?
I think that it's actually, for me, I think I'm able to separate my work off the field in areas of equality and social and racial justice, and my play on the field. I try to just focus on what I need to do for the team to win. But I do think that in every opportunity that I have, it's important that I talk about these things. And in that sense, yeah, of course it's a responsibility because I want to see change, and it, like Sarah said, it's going to take everybody to be involved in that. So the things that I have learned over the past few years with my experience with equality with the national team, and even a lot this past year with racial equality, I think that until for gender and pay equality, until we see that overinvestment in women's sports, the expectation on returns can't be the same. If you invested $100 in one thing and $10 in another thing, you're going to make more on the $100 investment. So what we want to see change is for companies and people to recognize that you can't just continue to throw out smaller amounts at the women and expect them to make you all the same money as the men. We really need to see overinvestment in those areas. And I think that that's something that it took me a while to fully grasp and understand. And I've learned so much from my teammates, but it's something that I want to share, and I'm trying to make other people understand and accept.
And I think when we look at an issue like equality, gender equality specifically in sports, obviously there's the long-term goal, and that's going to take some time. But there are also some short-term things that people can do in the meantime before we get there to better the situation. Sarah, I don't know if you feel similarly, if there are some things in the immediate that can be done so that we can reach that goal maybe even quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I look this year, I'm part of the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association. And so obviously this year has been completely different than any other year, but we're seeing a lot more involvement with media. And so prior to this year, we haven't had our games broadcast nationally on TV at all. Like if our games are streamed, we call it like the doorbell camera. You can't really see anything. Quality is terrible. So who's going to pay for a stream like that? But it's actually incredible what happens when you pull out all the stops and you actually broadcast a game nationally. People are flicking through their channels and they turn it on. And they're like, wow, this is actually really good. But they didn't see that before because one, they had to search for it through the internet. And they didn't have access to it. And so it's when we see that investment, we see that really good things happen. So that's something that on the media side, I think is very crucial. And I know that us as in our respective sports, we all have very passionate fans. We all have very passionate supporters. And so when we do get to be back and playing in our arenas and our stadiums, like buying tickets and coming to see us play, supporting with merchandise sales and everything like that is really important for us and obviously to our investors for return on investment, but it's all about the support. And I know that social media has been such a huge tool for the last few years. And I think that it's going to continue to be a huge tool too.
And Kathleen, in media, you mentioned earlier that you said that swimming is covered heavily, during the Olympics, maybe not so heavily outside of the Olympics. Can you talk about maybe media's coverage of swimming, and especially as it pertains to gender, and maybe some steps forward that could be taken?
Yeah, definitely our most attention we get is always the Olympic year. We have 2 world championships within an Olympic cycle of 4 years, and those still receive some attention, but definitely not the same, which is sometimes crazy because, like, just as exciting things are happening, people are still breaking world records, like having these crazy milestones that like no athletes have ever done. And on the gender side of things, I look at some of the athletes that I compete with all the time who are like breaking barriers. And I think about how if a male swimmer was breaking barriers, then it would be a little bit more blown up. And I think a little bit of that is changing in the sport. But luckily with swimming, we do have like a little bit more of a gender equality because we are like one team, male and female. We don't like really compete separately. But I definitely feel like as females, we have to go above and beyond, or often are compared to our male counterparts. Like we have a very good swimmer right now, and like they're the female Michael Phelps. I'm like, nope, she's just Katie. She is just her, and she's setting her own path. And at the same time, I think it's really great that our sport has so many prominent males in it that we can have amazing athletes, but our females are also doing amazing things. And hopefully this summer that we will be able to see an equal amount of attention to both. I don't always feel like it's unequal, but a lot of times I look at, you have to go above and beyond as a female athlete, and that is not just in the water. You need to be saying the right things in media. You need to be acting a certain way. You need to have this amount of sponsors. You need to look a certain way. And I think that on the male side of things, it's so much more based on performance.
Well, as we end here, Sam, you already somewhat alluded to this, but are steps being taken in the right direction? If so, are they going fast enough? Like, can you just update us on where you think we are in terms of gender equality in sports?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement, but that's not to say that things haven't gotten better. I think a perfect example, the NCAA March Madness bubble for the women with the weight rooms. I think an example of, obviously that wasn't equal. There was not like any kind of equality in those situations. But then at the same time, you see, I supported this. You see a company like Dick's Sporting Goods respond and want to supply all of these weights to the women. And in that sense, it's like, is it good enough? No. But are people and some companies that are responsible taking steps to improve it? Yes. So we have a lot of work to do, but I am optimistic that with women leading the way and working on this, that we can get to a place of true equality.
And Sarah, do you feel that for a young 5-year-old starting out in hockey like you did, is there more of an opportunity for her to play professionally than maybe you had? We're moving in the right direction?
We are moving in the right direction. I know when I grew up, I didn't know that other girls played hockey at all until I saw the Olympics in 2002. Like, I actually thought that I was the only girl who played. And so the fact that young girls have their own organizations and their own leagues from when they're small all the way up through high school before they go off to college, I think is so amazing. And it gives me so much hope for the future and getting girls involved in the sport. In terms of the professional level, we've been bringing a lot of awareness to what we're lacking at the professional level with hockey. And especially in Canada, we call it our national sport. And so a lot of people should be outraged that the fact that we cheer on our women every 4 years at the Olympics, but then we don't really care about them in the 4 years in between. And so as we look to move forward with what we're doing in the PWHPA, again, traveling around to different markets when we're able to, and playing hockey and bringing new supporters and fans and investors in, I definitely think that young girls growing up are going to have a great professional league to play in one day.
Amazing. Well, that I think is a great note to end on. Sam, Sarah, Kathleen, you are all so busy. You're around the world competing. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.